What if I told you that the first betrayal in the divine story didn't come from Lucifer, but from ancient beings who stood in the very presence of God long before Genesis? Imagine this. The very foundation of creation was rocked by an act of silent rejection. Not a battle, not a rebellion, but a quiet withdrawal from the divine plan. These beings, older than the angels and filled with divine consciousness, walked away from God's plan for mankind, not in anger, but in grief, a grief so profound that it echoed through eternity. Why would these ancient beings, who existed before time itself, reject God's plan for humanity? Could their silent defection be the true origin of the cosmic war that has shaped everything since? In this video, we're going to uncover the forgotten story of the primordial beings who turned away before Lucifer ever raised a fist in rebellion. We'll explore why their rejection of the Creator's plan may have been the spark that ignited the spiritual war between heaven and earth. You'll discover how their withdrawal set the stage for Lucifer's own defection, and what this ancient betrayal reveals about the nature of choice, free will, and the heart of the Creator. The truth is, betrayal doesn't always come in the form of defiance and fury. Sometimes, it's a quiet, devastating choice to turn away. But what does that mean for us today? What happens when we choose silence over communion? When we step back from faith without realizing the weight of our decision? You'll never look at the creation story, or the concept of betrayal, quite the same way again. Hold on, because what we're about to reveal might just change everything. And if this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold truths from the Bible. Before the earth was formed, before the stars were set in the sky, and before angels were summoned to sing praises in the heavenly courts, there existed beings unlike any we know. These beings were the primordials, creatures of pure consciousness, will, and intellect, born not from dust or light, but from the very essence of divine thought itself. They were not angels nor demons, but something in between, and they existed before time, before creation, before mankind. They were the first emanations, not bound by the laws of creation, but shaped by the thoughts of the Creator, made to be fully aware and fully free. And yet, when God revealed his plan to create mankind, to form a new creature from dust, something fragile, something capable of choice, they withdrew. They stepped back, not in fury, not in anger, but in grief. A grief so deep that it fractured the peace of heaven in ways we can hardly comprehend. These ancient beings, with their radiant intellect and free will, did not raise their voices in rebellion. They didn't protest with violence or defiance. No, their rejection of God's plan was silent, a quiet refusal that spoke louder than any war cry. Imagine that for a moment. To exist in the presence of the Creator, to see the divine plan unfold, and to feel something stir inside you, a resistance not from hatred, but from a profound sense of unworthiness. How could God create a being from dust, from imperfection? How could he create something that, from their eternal perspective, was so fragile, so flawed, so unworthy of the divine likeness? They saw it, these ancient beings, long before Lucifer ever questioned God's design. They saw a plan to create mankind, not as angels of glory, but as creatures of dust and breath, designed in the image of the divine, yet bound by the frailty of flesh. And they turned away, not with hatred, but with quiet grief. Some may even say it was the first heartbreak in heaven, the heartbreak of a creator who was abandoned, not through force, but through the silent decision of those closest to his heart. These primordials, once the closest of God's creations, who had witnessed the unfolding of his plan, simply withdrew from the divine light. Can you feel the weight of this? The tragedy that is not marked by a fiery rebellion, but by a gentle turning away. They did not stand in defiance. They did not challenge God's power. They simply looked upon his creation of mankind and in their wisdom, in their grief, chose to walk away. In doing so, they created a rift, a separation that was not of battle, but of intention. The heavens did not quake with thunder or fire, but there was a quiet tear in the fabric of divine unity. A space was created, not through chaos, but through sorrow. Now, let's think about what this teaches us. In a world where rebellion is often loud and visible, we rarely think of betrayal as a silent act. We imagine rebellion to be an act of defiance, something bold, something violent. But the story of the Primordials teaches us that betrayal doesn't always need a sword. Sometimes it's the absence of action, the turning away, the decision to disengage when you are fully capable of staying. They didn't strike out. They simply chose to leave, not because they hated creation, but because they couldn't understand it. They couldn't reconcile the divine plan to create something as fragile as man. And isn't this how so many of us operate in our lives? Not through outright rebellion, but through silence. How often do we turn away from relationships, from our purpose, from faith itself, not because we are angry or rebellious, but because we simply cannot comprehend or accept the reality before us? We withdraw just as the Primordials did, not in anger, but in confusion, in sorrow, in hesitation. Sometimes the greatest betrayal is not in loud defiance, but in quiet retreat. What if, like these beings, we've missed the point? What if the true purpose of creation, the true purpose of our lives, is to embrace the fragility of our existence, to choose to trust, even when we are imperfect? What if the Creator, knowing that we were dust, still chose to create us, still chose to love us, not because we are perfect, but because in our imperfection there is something deeper, a choice to love, to trust, to return, even when the world tells us to turn away. This is the profound lesson of the Primordials, that the true test of love, the true test of purpose, is not in blind obedience or radiant glory, but in choosing to stand with something even when we don't understand it. Even when it seems fragile, even when it seems beneath us. Their withdrawal wasn't an act of power, but of sorrow, of grief over a plan they couldn't accept. But the Creator, in his wisdom, leaned into that grief. He didn't abandon the plan, he deepened it. He chose to create something not of light and glory, but of dust, of frailty, of choice. And so, in the quiet absence of the Primordials, in the silent retreat from the divine plan, God continued. He didn't fight back with anger. He didn't demand compliance. Instead, he expanded his vision, deepened his love, and created man, not as a substitute for what was lost, but as a response to it. And that is the beauty of this story. The Creator saw the rejection, the turning away, and he answered with an invitation, not for blind obedience, but for something far more powerful, a choice to love, to trust, to follow, not because we are forced to, but because we choose to. Isn't that what makes humanity so special? We are not created to be mere echoes of the divine. We are created to choose, to trust, to walk in faith, not because we are commanded, but because we choose to believe, even when we cannot see. In that choice, in that free will, we become a response to the ancient betrayal, a response to the silent turning away of those who could not understand. And in that, we find the true beauty of our existence. So, what does this mean for us today? What does it mean to choose to trust, to embrace our own fragility and imperfection? Are we too, like the Primordials, tempted to turn away when things don't make sense? To step back in confusion or sorrow when what we're being asked to embrace seems too fragile, too imperfect. And if we choose to stay, if we choose to trust, can we too transform our imperfection into something divine? Something that answers the first betrayal with faith, with love, and with a choice to walk forward even when the path is unclear. I ask you, what will your choice be? Will you step away? Or will you choose to embrace the divine purpose even in your imperfection? The Creator who knew the hearts of the primordials continues to call each of us to choose, not out of command, but out of love, out of trust. And when we do, we heal not just ourselves, but the ancient wound of heaven itself. Share your thoughts, and let's continue this journey of discovery together. Lucifer, once the most radiant of all celestial beings, stood in the divine courts of heaven, basking in the brilliance of God's light. His name, Helben Shaka, meaning son of the morning, spoke of his unparalleled brilliance, his shining beauty, and his exalted place among the heavenly hosts. But despite his closeness to the Creator, something within Lucifer began to shift. The brilliance that once reflected God's glory started to cast a shadow over his heart. This wasn't the sudden, dramatic rebellion we often hear about, but the slow, creeping erosion of trust and understanding. Lucifer's fall did not begin in a flash of pride or a violent outburst against God. It began in silence, in contemplation, in a quiet questioning of God's plan. This was not the result of an impulsive decision, but of a growing discontent that festered over time. Lucifer, having seen the silent withdrawal of the primordials before him, began to question, why should God create mankind from dust? Why should fragile, imperfect creatures be given the attention and love that was once reserved for beings of light and purity? Lucifer's thoughts were not initially of hatred or rebellion, but of a profound disbelief in God's decision. He saw himself as the guardian of purity and order, and the creation of mankind seemed to him a mistake, an unnecessary risk. In the celestial courts, the question began to grow. What if mankind is a flaw in God's design? Lucifer didn't rebel because he hated God, but because he believed he was protecting God's holiness. He saw the creation of humanity not as an act of love, but as an act of weakness, a decision to lower the divine to something fragile, something capable of falling. Could God truly love something so imperfect? Was it not beneath the Eternal One to create creatures bound by sin and decay? These questions gnawed at him, and as time passed, they began to fester into a deep conviction. A conviction that would ultimately transform him from a radiant being of light into the adversary of all creation. In the quiet chambers of heaven, Lucifer became the first to voice what the primordials had only whispered. He did not step away silently as they had. Instead, he spoke. He did not quietly grieve God's decision, but openly challenged it. His rebellion was not born out of hatred for God, but out of a desire to preserve what he believed was the true essence of holiness. He felt that the Creator, in his infinite wisdom, had made a grave error. Mankind, fragile and imperfect, was unworthy of such divine attention and love. Lucifer's pride was not the pride of arrogance, but the pride of a being who believed in his own understanding of God's plan. In his mind, he was not opposing God's power, but protecting it. Lucifer's fall was not an act of open defiance at first. It was a subtle act of questioning and dissent. He believed he was protecting God's honor, standing as the voice of reason against what he perceived as an unnecessary and flawed creation. He approached the throne not as an enemy, but as a prosecutor. Should the throne not belong to those born of light, not of clay? His rebellion did not begin in darkness, but in the light, the very light he had once embodied. His rebellion was not against God's authority, but against God's decision to create something so vulnerable, so fragile, as mankind. In the midst of Lucifer's growing discontent, the question arose, what if we are not just servants of God, but something more? What if we too, as created beings, have a say in the divine plan? It was this question, this subtle seed of doubt, that began to take root in Lucifer's heart. He had once been the most trusted, the most radiant, and now he stood as the first to challenge the very foundation of creation. In that moment, he became not just a fallen angel, but the first being to take the rebellion of the primordials and turn it into something active, something dangerous. His questioning, his disbelief became his weapon. And in that moment, Lucifer's defiance became a cosmic shift that would echo through the ages. Lucifer did not fall because he was consumed by hatred. He fell because he could not accept the fragility of mankind. He could not accept a plan that placed the image of the divine into something so vulnerable. And yet in his desire to protect God's holiness, he found himself opposing the very will of the Creator. How often do we find ourselves in the same position, not rebelling out of hatred, but out of a desire to protect what we believe is right, only to discover that in our attempt to preserve, we destroy. Lucifer's fall was not the act of a villain, but of a being who was so convinced of his righteousness that he could not see the bigger picture. And so the rebellion began, not with a sword, not with fire, but with a quiet conviction, a slow erosion of trust. Lucifer, once the most trusted of all, became the adversary, the embodiment of all that would oppose the Creator's plan for mankind. His fall did not happen in an instant. It was a gradual turning away, a growing dissatisfaction with what he saw as the Creator's weakness in elevating something so fragile as man. He sought to defend the Creator's honor, but in doing so, he turned against the very essence of God's love. What can we learn from Lucifer's fall? It is not the anger or hatred that leads to betrayal, but the quiet discontent, the refusal to accept things as they are. Lucifer's fall wasn't a violent rebellion, it was a quiet belief that he knew better. It was the first time someone believed they could see the plan more clearly than the Creator himself. And isn't that how we often approach life? When things don't go as we expect, when we are faced with suffering or confusion, don't we too sometimes quietly turn away from God's plan, believing that we know better? Lucifer's rebellion teaches us that even the most righteous among us can fall if we refuse to accept things as they are. We can be blinded by our own understanding, by our own belief that we know what is best. But God, in His wisdom, continues to invite us into the divine plan, not to force us to obey, but to give us the freedom to choose trust, to choose faith, even when we do not understand. Lucifer fell because he could not accept the fragility of mankind, but God, in His infinite love, saw our fragility and chose to love us anyway. Lucifer's fall was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the Creator would prove that love is not about perfection, but about choice. A choice to love, even in the face of imperfection. And that choice, that divine love, would bring hope, redemption, and the possibility of restoration. As we reflect on Lucifer's rebellion, let us ask ourselves, do we trust in God's plan, even when it doesn't make sense? Do we, like Lucifer, sometimes question His decisions, believing that we know better? Can we accept our own fragility, our own imperfections, and still choose to love and trust in God's greater plan? Lucifer's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that the path of rebellion is not always born of hatred, but of confusion and doubt. Yet, even in the face of that doubt, God's plan for love and redemption continues, offering us the chance to choose, to trust, and to find restoration in His divine will. In the vast expanse of heaven, a moment of divine tension hung in the air as the Creator prepared to bring forth a new creation, one unlike any other. The primordials had already withdrawn in sorrow, And Lucifer too had begun his quiet rebellion, challenging God's wisdom in choosing to create mankind. Yet, in the face of this celestial unrest, God made his decision. He would create man, not from light or from the divine ether, but from the very dust of the earth, something fragile, something temporary, something that would one day return to the ground. And in this decision, he would show the universe something deeper, something more powerful than mere obedience, the freedom of choice, the power of love, and the mystery of trust. The creation of man was not an afterthought, nor was it a concession to appease the doubts that arose from the celestial rebellion. It was a bold and deliberate act of divine intention. God's decision to form Adam from the dust was not about weakness or failure. It was a profound declaration that love, true love, is not about perfection, but about the freedom to choose. He didn't make man to serve or to worship out of compulsion. He created man to love and to choose freely. In the quiet, broken places of heaven, where the primordials had turned away, where Lucifer's doubts festered, God created man not as a substitute, but as a response to the ancient sorrow, the ancient grief of rejection. The Genesis account tells us that God formed Adam from the dust of the ground, breathing into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. But the real miracle was not just in the creation of the body, nor even in the giving of life. The true miracle was in the design itself, the ability to choose. Adam was not just created as a vessel, but as a partner in creation, with the power to choose, to walk with God, or to turn away, just as the primordials had done long before. This moment of creation was a bold act of trust. God trusted Adam with the power to choose freely, even though he knew the potential consequences of that choice. He knew that Adam, in his freedom, might choose to step away, just as the primordials had. And yet, despite this risk, God still chose to breathe life into him. God was not afraid of the freedom of choice. He did not create a world of perfect, unquestioning obedience. No, he created a world where love was the highest calling, and love, true love, can only exist when it is freely chosen. Think about that for a moment. In creating Adam, God was not just taking a step forward in creation. He was taking a risk that his creation might turn away, might reject him, just as the first celestial beings had. But in this risk, he showed a depth of love that no perfection could ever express. Adam, the first man, was created not as a servant, but as a co-creator, with the ability to choose his path. And in that, God placed the ultimate trust. As God shaped Adam from the dust, he gave him dominion over all the earth. The animals, the trees, the waters, all were entrusted to Adam's care. God was not creating a master who would rule with an iron fist, but a steward who would tend and protect, whose heart would mirror God's own love for creation. Adam's role was not one of domination, but of partnership, a partnership rooted in love and trust, not control. And yet there was something more. Even in this perfect creation, even in the beauty of the Garden of Eden, God knew that Adam's heart would never fully be at peace unless he could experience the deepest relationship possible. God knew that man, as an image-bearer, was created for relationship, not just with God, but with one another. And so, God created Eve, not from the dust, but from Adam's side, as a companion, a helper, a partner. From the beginning, God designed humanity for community, for mutual care and respect. In this we see God's heart. He didn't just want a creature that would obey. He wanted a creature that could love, that could connect, that could experience the fullness of life with him and with each other. The creation of man was, in many ways, an answer to the cosmic rejection that had occurred long before. Where the primordials had turned away, where Lucifer had questioned the divine plan, God chose to move forward with his creation. He didn't let their rejection stop him. He didn't erase the plan. He deepened it. He created something more beautiful than the celestial beings. He created man in his image, with the freedom to choose, with the capacity to love, and with the potential to fall. This, then, is the great mystery of the creation of man. Not that we were made perfect, but that we were made free. Free to choose, free to love, free to trust. The story of Adam's creation is not one of perfect obedience, but one of divine risk. God's love for mankind was not about creating us to be perfect, but to be free. To give us the chance to say yes to him, not out of duty, but out of love. And in that freedom, in that trust, we were given the greatest gift of all, the ability to choose our relationship with God. And yet, this creation, this beautiful design, would soon face the greatest challenge. The same freedom that God gave Adam to choose love would be the very same freedom that could lead to rejection. Adam, made in the image of God, could choose to walk in the light, or he could choose to walk away. And it was in this freedom that the heart of humanity would be tested, just as the hearts of the Primordials and Lucifer had been tested before. Would Adam choose to trust in the Creator's plan? Would he choose love, or would he, too, step away from the divine vision? In this creation, God shows us something profound. Love is not just a feeling, but a choice. It's a decision to trust, to risk, and to give. And God, in his infinite wisdom, chose to trust us with that choice. In his heart, he knew that this was the only way true love could exist. Love that is forced is not love at all. But love that is freely chosen, even in the face of temptation, is the purest form of love. The creation of Adam, then, was not just the beginning of mankind, it was the beginning of the greatest story ever told, a story of love, choice, and the redemption that would come from the very fall that would soon unfold in Eden. It was a divine act that would echo through eternity, showing the world that love, true love, is not born from perfection, but from freedom. It is the story of how God, knowing full well the risk he was taking, still chose to create mankind, out of love, and out of the belief that we could one day choose him back. As you reflect on this act of creation, consider this. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? What does it mean to have the freedom to choose, to love, to trust, to risk? And how does that freedom shape your own relationship with the Creator? In the beginning, God gave us the gift of choice, and in that gift we find our true purpose. Not to obey blindly, but to love freely, to choose him, and to walk with him in the beauty of his creation. In the heart of the Garden of Eden, where peace reigned and the Creator walked in the cool of the day, there was a quiet presence that had been given life to tend and keep the garden. Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony with creation, untainted by sin, surrounded by the beauty of everything God had made. But in the midst of this perfect peace, a subtle shift began. The serpent, a creature both cunning and persuasive, slithered into the garden. It was not with fire or fury that he came, but with a question. A simple, seemingly innocent question that would challenge everything. Did God really say? With these words, doubt was sown into the hearts of humanity. What was once a perfect paradise where trust between man and God was unbroken, was now disrupted by a seed of doubt planted in Eve's heart. The serpent didn't attack the truth directly. No, he subtly twisted it. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? The question seemed harmless enough at first glance, but it carried within it a deeper implication, a suggestion that perhaps God was withholding something good, something better from them. This wasn't a blatant lie. It was a distortion of truth, a manipulation of perception. Eve responded, recounting what God had commanded. They could eat from every tree in the garden except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for if they ate from it, they would surely die. But the serpent's reply was even more cunning. even more insidious, you will not certainly die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This was not just a temptation. It was an invitation to transcend the limits God had placed on them. The serpent was offering something far greater than mere fruit. He was offering the chance to be like God himself. He was planting the idea that what God had given them was not enough, that there was something more to be had, something more to be experienced. In this moment, Eve was faced with a choice. Would she trust in God's goodness and wisdom, or would she reach out to grasp something that seemed to promise a deeper understanding, a greater power? The fruit of the tree, the object of her desire, became the symbol of this choice. The desire to be like God, to know good and evil, seemed so alluring, so tempting. Eve looked at the fruit. It was pleasing to the eye, desirable for gaining wisdom, and she took it. She ate, and she gave some to Adam, who was with her, and he ate as well. What followed was not the immediate experience of godlike power, but a deep, immediate awareness of their nakedness. The beautiful harmony that once existed between Adam, Eve, and the Creator was shattered in an instant. They knew that they were exposed, vulnerable, and they sought to hide themselves from God. The very freedom they had been given to live in perfect communion with their Creator was now tainted by shame, guilt, and the fear of punishment. This moment in Eden, this act of disobedience, was more than just eating a forbidden fruit. It was the first step toward spiritual death. It was a rejection of the Creator's design and a choosing of their own path, a path that led away from trust and towards self-reliance. The serpent had promised that they would be like God, but what they gained was not divine knowledge, but the awareness of their brokenness. They became aware of good and evil, but instead of gaining wisdom, they lost innocence. They did not gain freedom, but became slaves to the knowledge of their shame and sin. What can we learn from this story, from this moment of temptation and fall? First, it teaches us the power of choice. The freedom to choose is a gift from God, but it is also a responsibility. With that freedom comes the ability to choose trust or doubt, life or death. The serpent didn't force Eve to eat the fruit. He simply offered her the choice, and in her decision, the course of humanity was changed forever. In the same way, we face choices every day. Choices between trusting God and doubting His goodness. Choices between living in the light or stepping into the shadows of our own understanding. Second, we see how subtle temptation can be. The serpent didn't present Eve with a bold, obvious lie. He simply distorted the truth. Did God really say? It was an invitation to question what she had always known, to question the goodness and wisdom of the Creator. How often do we face temptation in the same way? How often do we hear the whispers of doubt? Is this really God's plan for me? Am I missing out on something better? The temptation is not always blatant. It often comes in the form of questions, uncertainties, and the desire for something more. But what we must remember is that God's plan for us is always good, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it seems that there are greater things to be had. True fulfillment is found not in grasping for more, but in trusting God with what He has already given. Another profound lesson from this story is the danger of self-reliance. Eve's choice to eat the fruit was a choice to step away from God's plan and rely on her own understanding. The serpent promised that she would be like God, knowing good and evil, but in reality, she lost the simplicity of living in perfect harmony with the Creator. She chose to step into a world where she would have to rely on her own judgment, her own ability to discern good from evil, rather than trusting in the wisdom of God. How often do we fall into the same trap? How often do we think that we know better than God, that our judgment is more trustworthy than His? But just as Eve learned, Self-reliance leads only to confusion, shame, and separation from God. In the aftermath of their choice, Adam and Eve's eyes were opened, but not in the way they expected. They saw their nakedness and were filled with shame. They heard God walking in the garden, and they hid from him. The very freedom they had once enjoyed was now overshadowed by fear and guilt. They tried to cover their shame with fig leaves, but their attempts to hide from God were futile. In the same way, our attempts to hide from our sin, to cover it up with our own efforts, will never bring healing. Only when we bring our brokenness to God, when we confess our mistakes and trust in His grace, can we be restored. The story of temptation in the Garden of Eden is not just an ancient story about two people in a distant past. It is our story too. Each of us faces moments of temptation, moments when we must choose between trusting God and stepping into doubt, between relying on God's wisdom or our own. The same serpent who tempted Eve still whispers to us today, still seeks to sow doubt and lead us away from the Creator's plan. But the beauty of this story is that God didn't abandon Adam and Eve after their fall. He didn't leave them in their shame. Instead, He sought them out, calling them, "Where are you?" Even in their disobedience, God's heart was still to restore them. And in that, we see the heart of the gospel, the heart of redemption. No matter how far we've gone, no matter how many times we've given in to temptation, God is still calling us, still seeking us, still offering His grace. The temptation in the Garden of Eden teaches us about the power of choice, the danger of self-reliance, and the depth of God's love. It reminds us that while temptation may offer us a fleeting sense of fulfillment, true peace and restoration can only be found in trusting God's plan for our lives. Even when we fall, even when we make mistakes, God's heart is still to restore us, to heal us, and to bring us back into the fullness of His love. In the beginning, God created man in His image, a being capable of love, freedom, and choice. In the Garden of Eden, where everything was perfect, where trust was pure and unbroken, Adam and Eve lived in harmony with the Creator. Yet, the story of humanity didn't end with that first perfect moment. It was a story written with choices, choices that would echo through eternity. Their fall, their decision to step away from God's perfect plan, was the first of many that have shaped the course of our world. But even in that moment of loss, there was a profound truth. The Creator didn't abandon His creation. He didn't leave them in their shame. He didn't turn His back when humanity first turned away. No, God reached out, called them, and began the long journey of redemption that would lead to the greatest story ever told. And what is that story? It is the story of love, a love so powerful that it is not constrained by perfection, but is made more beautiful by choice. The Creator risked everything, giving us the freedom to choose, knowing that we might choose wrongly. He gave us the ability to walk with Him, to trust Him, and to love Him freely, even when it seemed difficult, even when the world was dark, and even when we couldn't see the way ahead. He gave us this gift, not because we deserve it, but because He loves us with a love that is not conditional, a love that pursues us even when we step away, even when we doubt, even when we choose our own path over His. This is the truth that carries through from Eden to the cross. God's love is the constant, the unchanging force in our lives. It's the love that never leaves us, even when we fall, even when we choose the wrong path. And it's the love that calls us back every single time. The story of Adam and Eve is not just about sin and fallenness. It's about the Creator's relentless pursuit of His creation. It's about the heart of God, a heart that aches for us when we step away, and yet a heart that never stops reaching out, calling us home, offering us redemption, hope, and the chance to begin again. The Garden of Eden was the birthplace of humanity, but it was also the birthplace of grace. The first fall, the first betrayal, didn't lead to abandonment. It led to a promise. The promise of redemption that would unfold throughout history. The promise that no matter how far we've gone, no matter how many times we've stumbled, God's grace is always there to pick us up, to restore us, and to offer us a future filled with hope. And that promise isn't just for Adam and Eve, it's for each of us. We are not alone in our struggles. We are not abandoned in our moments of doubt. The same grace that was extended to the first man and woman is available to us today, to anyone who is willing to turn toward the light, to walk in faith, and to trust in the Creator's love. If this message has touched your heart, if it has brought light to your soul in the midst of darkness, I invite you to support this channel. Your encouragement, your energy, and your presence here mean more than words can express. Every like, every share, every comment is a piece of the light that spreads further into the world, reaching those who need to hear these truths. Together, we can continue to share the message of grace, of hope, and of divine love. Your support, no matter how small it may seem, is invaluable. It fuels this journey. It helps us continue to share the message that God's love is greater than anything we can imagine, that His plan for us is good, even when we don't understand it. If this video has helped you, if it has given you hope, I ask that you take a moment to share this with someone who may need it. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let's continue this conversation. Let's continue to reflect on the Creator's love, the love that was given freely to us, and let us be the light that shines in the darkness for those who are still searching. As you go forward in your day, remember that the story of Adam and Eve is not just a story from long ago, it's your story too. You are not defined by your mistakes, by your doubts, or by the times you've walked away. You are defined by the grace that calls you back, by the love that never lets go. You are more than your failures, more than your past. You are a beloved child of the Creator, called to live in freedom, in love, and in trust. If you feel that this video has brought you closer to the heart of God, or if it has shed light on your own path, I invite you to like this video, subscribe for more, and share this message with others. Let's walk this journey together, supporting one another, lifting each other up in the love of God. May His grace surround you, His peace fill you, and His love lead you every step of the way. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Thank you for supporting this channel and for being a part of this journey of sharing His light with the world.